Hello, everyone. Like Professor Ren said, my name is Mason Gaw, and Jeffrey Long was my sponsor. And this is new and emerging media in game design. So just to start out, what is new media in game design? So basically, there's three main types, that being virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality, and they're all quite different. Virtual reality is a computer simulated environment, usually using a headset. I'm sure everyone has seen the Oculus headsets that have recently come to popularity. Um, Augmented reality is honestly quite different. It projects digital objects into the physical world. So, best example of this is when you're furniture shopping and on your iPhone, it asks to use your camera to show what the couch would look like in your living room. That would be augmented reality. And then mixed reality is kind of a combination of both. It uses a headset, but it produces digital elements onto basically like glasses, goggles. So it looks like you're seeing into the real world, but it's not. It's obviously digital objects, they're not there. Um, and so taking that into account, now we look at game design and how uh, game design affects these new media, or more so how the media affects game design. To do this, I needed to understand the traditional methods of game design, as well as what transmedia storytelling is, which I will touch on my next slide. Um, how to use these new forms of media in games to make sure that I'm utilizing them properly, as well as transforming the traditional game mechanics into new media game mechanics. So what is transmedia storytelling? Like I mentioned on my last slide. Uh, Long story short, it is one story told through several different forms of media. And I'll give a few examples on my next slide just because it can be a little confusing. But this definition right here, I do want to sum up just because it can also be a little confusing. Um, Basically, it is a medium can be anything. It can be as simple as comic books, movies, TV shows, video games, or it can be something totally random, like telling a story through t-shirts. Um, and The way that the story flows from one medium to another is what makes transmedia storytelling so unique and interesting, because users are allowed to interact with the different mediums well differently. Games, obviously, you play them, and movies, you watch them. So it makes for a much interesting story when you're actually getting to interact with it versus just watching it. So for my two examples, I have Marvel and Star Wars. Marvel, more recently, obviously, Marvel started out as comic books, as I'm sure most people know, and more recently has turned into movies, and now we have the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And those movies, within the last 3 months, they've started producing TV shows that we can watch on Disney Plus, where the TV shows kind of tie in between movies. So WandaVision takes place after Avengers Endgame, but before the most recent Marvel movie we got, that being Spider-Man Far From Home. And that's just a very brief, broad transmedia story. Star Wars is much more complicated. It originally started out as books. It then turned into movies, starting in the 80s. Um, it also has a series of comics. There's a series of video games that were made, and all of these different mediums tie in and continue the story. There's also a series of animated TV shows, as well as we now have the live action TV shows with The Mandalorian. And all of them tie in to be one really, really long story, starting way before the movies actually start, that being episode one, and continue on through the most recent movies that we got, that being the most recent one in 2019, I believe. So now moving on into game design, it's a really, really broad field. There's so much that actually goes into game design. The key parts that I focused on were the coding, and the level design. But each of these sections actually is divided up into subsections. I also focused on a lot on the story and world building. For the main sections, you have world building, writing, so writing the actual story, voice acting and sound design, 2D art for a 2D game, sometimes even in 3D games, there's 2D art, 3D art for 3D games, animation, 3D animation, user interface design, hardware, and coding. And then each of those can really be divided up into subsections as well. Um, Now, for the main thing when designing a game, you need to have a loop. And a loop is the basic repeatable action in a game. Um, these generally teach the player how to play the game, and can include running, jumping, shooting a gun, melee weapons, and so much more. And as you progress through the game, the loop tends to get you'll as you progress through the game, you learn the game and how to be better at the game. So the loop improves and gets more and more difficult as you continue on in the game. Um, and then for skill chains are a series of loops that you combine into one to create a new loop, a new action. So in Mario, when you run and you jump, if you time it perfectly, you'll land on the Goomba and take out the enemy. This is a really basic skill chain, but they do get a lot more complicated in some of the more modern games. And then for Monopoly, the basic loop would be to monopolize the board. Your goal is to put down as much real estate on the board as possible. And as the board continues to fill up, it gets more and more difficult for you as well as your opponents to go around the board and pass go each time, making it more difficult, like I said. Um, Now, for unique game mechanics, mechanics are what make games unique. They make them different from their other similar games. Generally, game mechanics have a specific. Oh gosh, I'm trying to think of the world. They have a specific like way of doing certain actions. And I'll give some examples. So these could be as simple as leveling systems. Well, leveling systems can also be very complex. They could also be puzzles. And one of the books that I read by Tracy Fullerton, she actually claims that there's little innovation when it comes to making new mechanics. And a lot of games will just take the core foundations and the core mechanics and just reuse them in their next AAA title. This is more so for the big companies that make games and less so for indie games. They usually find a way to make unique mechanics. And then uh, an example of this would be lives and 2D side scrollers. They lives can make or break a game. They're either really, really easy and you have so many lives that you don't, it doesn't really matter, or you have so few that you feel like you're going to make a mistake every, tiny move you make. And then game mechanic can be poorly implemented or really well implemented, as I will show with a few examples here. This first game on the left is Demon Souls. The basic mechanic here is that every time you die, you lose half your health, and the only way to get that half of the health back is to defeat the final boss at the end of the level. This one over here on the right is oh Uh, whoops. Let me get back to where I was. Okay, sorry about that. This one over here, you have a bird as a like partner in the game, and you can scout ahead to see your enemies using what's called an eagle eye, basically. This one down here in the corner, this is Cyberpunk 2077. It is cybernetic enhancements, basically, allowing you to develop new abilities over time in the game. This one over here, this is Ghost of Tsushima. It's a samurai game, and you have four unique enemies and four unique stances that basically each one benefits you when fighting against certain enemies. And then this last one in the middle is Assassin's Creed Odyssey, where it would deter players from going against higher level enemies by putting a level requirement on their items after you defeat them. Now, for what I actually did, I did create a game for this project. It was Operation Midnight Stripes. It originated from a narrative design document in Game Design 2.0 with Jeffrey Long. It was a group project, and I was given permission by my group members as well as Professor Wren to continue to work on it for my senior project. I developed a physical paper prototype, a board game prototype, and the story then continues into the virtual reality game. The board game was I took all of the mechanics and put them into a board game basically, and this made me rethink how to do certain things. So big things were player movement, enemy movement, how to use special items in the game, as well as how to use weapons in the game. Just because on a board game it is a little bit more complicated. Now, for designing for virtual reality, I had to take into account the physical mechanics that I used in the actual physical escape room and figure out how to digitize those. I did have to make some sacrifices. I couldn't bring everything over into Unity. I did have to simulate physics. I am by no means a physicist, and this was probably the most challenging part of creating my game. I did have to come up with new puzzles for the game, transferring like locks and stuff into virtual reality or even regular video games is quite difficult. I also had to learn 3D animation, take into account comfort and motion sickness, just because in virtual reality, it is very common to get motion sick, and I got sick a lot while developing, as well as how to move and turning my regular mechanics into VR mechanics. Now, Unity development, I had never used Unity before, so I did teach myself quite a bit. I found it a lot easier to work with than Unreal Engine. I did have to learn how to use add-on programs such as Oculus integration tools and Virtual Reality Toolkit. I did teach myself C#, as well as how to 3D animate. And now I have a brief trailer to sum up my development.
Mason, is there sound?
There should be.
When you're doing the share screen, be sure to click the enable your sound thing in the lower left corner.
Okay. All right. So in conclusion, I'm very happy with the fact that I was able to utilize transmedia storytelling. I did uh, use the board game to tell part of the story, as well as the virtual reality part to tell another part, and then there is a written story as well to start the actual story. I do believe that physical games such as escape rooms have a future in virtual reality. Prototyping games are a very, very essential part of the design process. I do not believe I would have been able to successfully create my game without doing so. The creation of the story And then the game is also an essential part of the design process. I was able to, since I already had the story, it was very easy to just put the game into the story and focus more on the level design, as well as the puzzles. And then audience engagement through transmedia storytelling is very important. I really do believe that transmedia storytelling is very successful, as proven through Marvel and Star Wars, and is the future of storytelling. And then lastly, just a couple thank yous. I do want to say thank you to Jeffrey Long. He did get me started in game design, and I would not be where I am, nor going where I'm going with game design in the future. I also want to say thank you to my parents. They were a big help through going through college as well as working on this project. I also want to say thank you to Maggie Keller, Caitlin Greenup, and Paul Trejo. They were my 3 play testers. Due to COVID, I wish I could have done more, but I unfortunately was not able to. I also want to say a big thank you to my group for letting me continue to use this project for my senior project, as well as a big thank you to James Behenna and Matthew McClylov for doing voice acting for me in my game.